Hey everyone, I'm Julie Gunlock, the director of the Independent Women's Network. I'd like to welcome all of you to this important behind the scenes look at the Kappa Kappa Gamma alumni lawsuit. It is not hyperbole or alarmism to say that women's spaces, their safety and security are under threat at every level. And that threat comes from men, biological men who expect all of us to set aside our feelings of discomfort, our feelings of danger, to make them feel better. It's nonsense, it's totally absurd, and it's cruel, and women need to fight back. And yet, too often, women stay silent as males enter women's spaces and sports because they want to be kind, or perhaps they're intimidated or they fear being canceled. Many women simply don't speak up because they lack a powerful role model. And that's why it's so important that alumni of Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority, including our very own IWN members, have filed a lawsuit against Kappa's governing officials. To talk about the lawsuit, I am joined by co counsel on the case, Independent Women's Law Center Director May Mailman. May is a formal legal advisor to President Trump, where she advised on a wide range of policies, including healthcare, immigration, and social issues. I'm also joined by IWN member Patsy Levang and Cheryl Tuck Smith, both of whom were removed from Kappa after more than 50 years of service to the sorority for speaking out against Kappa's hidden policy promoting the initiation of men, despite the clear prohibition in Kappa's governing documents. Also joining us is IWN North Dakota chapter leader Margot Knorr, a Kappa alumna. She's daughter of Patsy and plaintiff on the case. Ladies, thank you for being here today and sharing your incredible story. I'm now going to hand this over to May.
All right. Thanks, Julie. We're very excited to be here and talk about what's happening in sororities and what these three brave ladies, and there are a few others too, are doing to reclaim the word woman, reclaim sororities, and reclaim directors actually caring about what women think, what women want, and asking us if we would like to have our membership or our membership only organizations change to be co-ed. So how we're going to walk through this, I'm going to give a really brief overview of what's going on and then direct the questions to the ladies. So as a lot of you know, the Kappa Gamma chapter in Wyoming had initiated a biological male. There is a lawsuit going on about that because Kappa's bylaws say that all new members shall be a woman, and that's pretty clear. So the directors of Kappa Kappa Gamma, who really did push a male through the process without the consent of the women, without going through the proper processes, they have a lawsuit going on there. Then, so why are we here with alumni members? That's where we're going to turn today, because Kappa's actions following pushing the male into the sorority are potentially like they're more shocking. It is actually you think we're not even living in America. So let's start. I just make sure from the top. So Patsy, when did you first find out about what was going on at the University of Wyoming? And when did you learn about that? What did you hear?
I couldn't believe what I was hearing from a friend, and I decided, wow, I need to reach out to these young women in Wyoming because I hadn't heard a thing about it. I'd been a bit out of the loop and had volunteered with Kappa steady all the way through 2015, 2016, and then was out of the loop for a bit, and here's all this happening. So I reached out to one of the young ladies at Wyoming, and when I did that, she was so overcome that somebody cared enough to say, hey, we're hearing what's happening, and we really don't understand how a man could come in through the back door sort of Kappa Kappa Gamma and come into Wyoming. So I had a wonderful visit with this young lady, and she was so relieved to hear that alumni that hadn't been in the loop really were very concerned about what we were hearing. And I was delighted to meet them, went down to Wyoming, delightful young ladies, and very, very disappointed in what was happening and how they felt pressured and how it was handled at the chapter level. So yes, that's how I heard, and that's how I got involved, and just decided we have to take a stand on these issues today, because men have never been a part of Kappa Kappa Gamma and have no business being a part of a women-only organization. This is for us. This is our sisterhood. This is where we learned leadership. It should be there for the future of young women everywhere. If they choose to join a sorority, they should have that space. For women only, they should have that opportunity to grow in leadership, to academically be supported, and to socially grow in their person. So to me, it was just a natural to stand up for them.
Yeah, and then Cheryl, we'll come to you in 1 second, but Patsy, just to finish off, what action did you take to support these women? I mean, did you terrorize the mail? Did you go protest with angry signs? Like, what did you do once you knew that you wanted to support these young women?
Well, the first thing we did was we went down to Wyoming and we had lunch with a group of them. And then we went back and forth a little bit, got to spend some time with them, and just decided that whatever needed to happen, we would do it. And I spoke out to the council. I sent emails to them asking for conversation. There was no conversation. There was no back and forth to understand better. There just was no communication. And so based on that, I spoke to a number of people. I went to Dallas, Texas, and found a group of my Kappa friends down there. I asked these ladies if they were interested in doing something to help with standing up for what we knew as Kappa Kappa Gamma, and most certainly. And that's how the organization kind of got launched. And from there on, we have had Kappas from all over the United States. I was a foundation person. I was president of the foundation for Kappa Kappa Gamma. I traveled all over the country raising money for women only. And to see this thing start to happen and realize that it had been non-transparent. There had not been any wide open door to see what was going on with our council. And so consequently, we just decided, well, wow, we are going to do everything we can to support women and women only opportunities in a sorority on a college campus.
And then you also, I think, wrote an op-ed. Is that right? And what was the piece about? What did you argue in that op-ed?
Well, in that op-ed, we talked a lot about, well, we've had a couple here, but the first one, we talked a lot about the fact that, you know, we believe that when a man comes to a sorority, and that's not the first time in history that men have been interested in sororities and getting a pass to get into the house. But when a man comes and represents himself as something other than what we accept as women only, I could not believe it. I could not believe the boldness and the audacity. And I guess we spoke to that repeatedly, that this was not within the framework of Kappa Kappa Gamma as we knew it. And certainly as the bylaws had not been changed. So the bylaws still stated women only.
Okay, so you sent some emails, had some lunches, wrote an op-ed saying that I know how to read the bylaws, and they say a new member shall be a woman. Cheryl, when did you learn about what was going on? And you were formerly a Wyoming chapter member, so this is your house. And what was your response? Did you pick it? Did you go, do something crazy? What was your role in responding?
Well, what happened with me was one of my Kappa sisters from college contacted me in November of 2022 and asked me if I knew what had happened at the Kappa house when an individual pretending to be a woman was accepted as a member. And I had learned of it, but I felt helpless. And so I talked to her, and she let me know about other like-minded Kappas that were going to help the actives and back the actives if the actives in the house really wanted to pursue keeping transgender men out of a female-only sorority. So I connected with people like Patsy and other like-minded Kappas throughout the nation. And we started talking back and forth about what we could do to help these young actives at the University of Wyoming. So the lawsuit was filed, and the plaintiffs' names were anonymous when the initial case was filed. Then the judge ruled that if the actives wanted to continue with that lawsuit, they had to disclose their names. And 6 of those young, brave women disclosed their names as plaintiffs. And at that point, I thought, if those young women can disclose their names, then I would be brave enough to communicate with other alumni and tell them about what was happening.
So some more emails, yep, explaining to members what was happening in the Wyoming chapter. And for that, you got sent to standards, just like when I didn't get on the bus. I was in a sorority and you're supposed to get on the bus to go to formal, but I decided to walk to my formal instead. And so I got sent to standards. But now you're being sent to standards. And, you know, Margot, when did you hear about what was happening to your mom, Patsy, and to your fellow Wyoming chapter member, Cheryl? And what was your reaction to them being A, called in, and then B, kicked out?
Right. No, I was shocked. I was really troubled because it didn't make sense to me how these esteemed Kappas, my mom was Foundation National President, and Cheryl Tuck was an attorney and active member of her Alumni Association. It was just troubling to think that we could, as Kappa sisters, not have varied opinions and differing opinions, and that their voices were silenced. It was almost as though if you had a differing opinion, you were ousted. And that's not Kappa. That's not the Kappa I know. And I just knew right then and there when I was seeing that these women were being pushed out who had long time been members, that whatever Kappa Council was advocating for was no longer for Kappa women. And so it appeared to me that they were advocating for causes outside of the Kappa membership. And, you know, my point is, if you want to have a co-ed organization, then form yourself a co-ed organization, but don't use the Kappa platform to try to push forward an agenda. So I was happy to get involved. And although it's not my first choice of how to handle things, when I realized, boy, this just isn't stopping I call it elder abuse. It's not stopping. And it's just so frustrating to see such wonderful women be hurt in such a way.
Yeah. So, you know, Kappa went through their process, said that Patsy and Cheryl were somehow violating the purposes and, you know, the mission of Kappa, even though the purpose and mission of Kappa is to support and uplift women. And here are Patsy and Cheryl supporting women, but somehow that's a violation. So they were kicked out of their lifetime membership of Kappa. But then what next? I mean, this is an organization that maybe you don't recognize anymore. Certainly, leadership is making decisions that are counter to the mission of Kappa. So why sue? You know, why not A, just go along with it, or B, go public with it, let people know that this is happening. But you took the third step, which is actually to bring legal action saying that these directors are violating their duties to the sorority. So Patsy, we'll start with you. Why did you decide to go ahead and bring a lawsuit?
Well, the decision to bring the lawsuit seemed like the only step that would get their attention, to know that we are serious. Yes, we did go out across the country and talk to people, Kappas, as many as we could get to. But the bottom line was they were not listening. They weren't communicating with us. They weren't speaking to us outside of a very rudimentary, what looked like a canned email that came. I'd have to say I was most disappointed because I did know some of the women surrounding this. But as far as the main people in council, I really didn't know them, and I was shocked at their lack of communication. So I really felt like, yes, a lawsuit is about the only thing we can do, even though we are funding this ourselves, we still felt strongly enough that we've got to do something. We've got to stop this landslide toward an organization that would totally be different than what we had known as Kappa Kappa Gamma. And the lawsuits are never fun, but sometimes they are a must to bring attention to something so wrong as allowing men in through the door of Kappa Kappa Gamma. And it's not our first time to have this discussion, and we have a special carve out with Title IX allowing us to have a single sex organization on the college campus. And I will tell you this, that on these large college campuses, the one I went to, North Dakota State, was about 15,000, 12 to 15,000 during my time there. And it was that small set, that wonderful sisterhood that made it possible for me to grow in leadership and skills. And I felt we have to do something. So a lawsuit was really our only recourse.
Great. And Cheryl, what about you? Why not just leave it behind?
Well, we were promised a lifetime membership in an organization for women only. And I believed it. And then when things started changing and I realized that this DEI agenda, which is really a false moniker, they don't want diversity, they don't want inclusion, and they don't want equality. They want to get rid of us oldies but goodies. And so when I realized that this issue was not just a Kappa issue, this is really an issue that strikes at all women. And we see that in sports. We see this where they're putting pretend men in as beauty queens. None of it makes sense. Common sense went out the window. So at that point, I just went, we have to do something to make the leadership of Kappa accountable, because their actions are having consequences. And in my mind, they are hurting the women, the young women today and future generations of women. Patsy and I came from the 1960s and 70s when there was a lot of activism about women. And we've made incredible strides. And it makes no sense to me at all that we would give up all of our efforts and strides that we've made. So I just saw it as a bigger issue and that we needed to do something and take action. So we did.
All right. So the lawsuit that you filed was filed on January 25th, so very recently, and therefore there's not been any action on that yet, but that'll be upcoming. You can find the actual complaint on the Independent Women's Law Center website, IWLC.org. And if you go to our litigation spot and drop down, there's Levang versus Kappa Kappa Gamma, and you can take a look at it. So it's 186 pages with exhibits, but I'll quickly sum it up for everybody. Basically, it shows that Kappa leadership has been engaging in a concerted effort, indeed a conspiracy, to try and change Kappa without going through the proper process. So that there has been basically a political agenda that has overtaken the leadership of Kappa Kappa Gamma, and they have therefore put Kappa's mission aside to pursue their own mission. And then it talks about all the damage that has created, that it has harmed Kappa itself, whether that's its fundraising, it has deceived donors. It has obviously harmed the women who are in the chapter. It's harmed women who are not in the chapter, who would not be able to join Kappa because they don't have the GPAs, or they are not given the benefit of the doubt that a male has in order to be in it. So even people who are not in Kappa are being harmed by the leadership's action. So, you know, if you have a very boring Tuesday and you want to take a look at a 186-page complaint, there's definitely one for you on the IWLC.org website. So last question is for Margot, and then we will open it up. So Margot, you are not kicked out. I guess your emails are not as exciting. I don't know. But why, you know, what should people do who are part of Kappa? Because I think a lot of things that we hear is, you know, especially if you look at Twitter, you know, these women should leave. So what should current members do? Should they stay in or should they leave? And then we've got some mothers here whose daughters are rushing. Should they rush Kappa? I mean, should they rush a sorority at all? Should they find a separate organization? So, you know, why are you staying in Kappa, and what do you think other people should think about as they're trying to make their decisions?
I'm staying in Kappa because it's so, you can't run away and hide from this issue. It's not going away in terms of what's happening to women. Our voices do matter. And just because we advocate for a women-only single-sex organization doesn't mean that we don't like men. They have their fraternal side and they have fraternity, they have that opportunity. And I think both men and women deserve that. And we shouldn't be afraid to say no when we're upholding the bylaws, and to stand up and say no. And women should consider being in sororities, but make sure that you're willing to stand and advocate for what that membership means. And I think I would be doing a disservice to just walk away and say, oh, no longer a member now because they're allowing certain things that violate our bylaws in. No, you have to stand and make corrections and bring it back on track. And that's why I'm staying and why I will continue to push forward.
Okay, that's great. So, if you are a member in the audience, I think you can submit questions, and then those will get pushed here. So let me just see what we have as far as pre-submitted questions. Julie, if you want to go ahead and pop in too. Oh, muted.
Thank you, May. I'm more than happy to jump in here. We do have a couple questions, but I'm going to take advantage of hosting this and ask my question here of all of you ladies. Riley Gaines, when she talks about sports, she has actually advised women to just not compete. If there is a man in your heat or in your competitive category, you shouldn't have to compete against these males, and you should step aside. Now that is painful and that is terrible that women are having to do this, but she's trying to make a strong point. What is your advice to parents about when they send their daughters off to college? Should they still pledge? This is a problem that is, it's not just Kappa Kappa Gamma. It is a problem with most of the sororities out there today. So I'm just kind of curious. You all are committed to Cap, or we're and still are committed to Kappa Kappa Gamma, and you live the sorority life, you live the Greek life. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
As a past athlete, I guess I would jump in here, and that is, Riley's absolutely right. We do have to take a stand that's painful. And I think for those of us who are already involved, we're here, we're maintaining, we're not leaving our membership. But to kind of rephrase what I was saying before, if this doesn't turn around, no, I would never advocate for a young girl to be put into a sorority house where she is surrounded by men being able to have access to her private quarters at all hours. It's just not fair to her. And so that funding that they would put towards this sorority can go to much more valuable things until this gets switched around and back to what it needs to be, which is women only.
Cheryl, did you have something to add? You're muted, so unmute. There you go.
Oh, am I muted?
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Okay. I would like to add that if my daughter or granddaughter were interested in going through Rush, I would encourage them to do it with these caveats. When they're going through Rush, I would simply ask each house, do they have any trans members? Do they allow trans members? And are there any trans people going through Rush now? And what is the philosophy of that house in accepting trans members?
Smart. Patsy, did you have anything to add on that?
I do. One of the things I would say is that as a young freshman, probably 18, 19-year-old, it's difficult to be made to make decisions that seem to be so weighty. And yet what Cheryl suggested is absolutely right. You need to know what you are getting into. But at the same time, National Panhellenic Conference, which is NPC and runs the rules on all of, or has the unanimous agreements for all of the sororities, I think they also need to be called into account by the parents, by the people running the college. Everybody has to be brought into accordance, because I don't think they've thought very far ahead as to what is the fallout by having this whole mess come into sororities. And yes, ask to see what their policies are, but their bylaws haven't changed either. So this should be across the board for women only. And as an 18, 19-year-old, I can't expect them to go ahead and try to ask those hard questions, but moms and dads will. We encountered a number of people in the process down in Wyoming of parents who were very, very worked up about what they were finding. I, as a grandmother, would want for my granddaughters to have the experience I had. So yes, I think all of those questions have to be asked, and moms and dads need to put on the pressure on NPC as well as the national organizations.
That's great advice, and it really goes back to the beginning of what I was saying in the intro, which is these young women need strong leaders, but parents also need to stand up and not leave it up to their daughters to face this. That's great advice, Patsy. May, if it's okay with you, I'll ask a member question that's come
Yeah, let's
through.
do one. But I just have putting my IWLC hat on for a second. So one of the things that I guess I want to emphasize, and that's definitely a part of the other lawsuit, which is the girls who are actually having to deal with this, is that it has nothing to do with trans. In fact, trans isn't even really well identified. If you are a woman who wears pants, are you gender non-conforming and therefore trans? Like, it's this thing that doesn't really exist. Does it mean you have a new driver's license? Like, what does that even mean? So this has nothing to do with trans. This has nothing to do with, your mental health or whatever. This has to do with biological males in a female space. And, you can be as feminine as a male as you would like, but we all know that there are things, there is a comfort, there is a feeling, there is a sisterhood that is involved in being in a sorority, and women should not have that stripped of them from biological males. So for us, this is not at all about whatever it means to be trans, etc. This has to do with what it means to be a biological male.
Great. Thank you, May. I'm going to move on to a member question from Kristen Henderson. She writes, how did the trans identifying male from Arizona become an alumni member of KKG? And did his presence and leadership contribute to the push to pledge a trans identifying male at Wyoming? Is this occurring in any other sororities? I will open that up, whoever wants to take that.
I'd be happy to speak to one part of it. That was quite a full question there, but I would say that one of the things that was done in the Arizona situation is that very few people were privy to the fact that this had happened. And a couple of my friends said that they were on a Zoom call, and this gentleman who claims to identify as a woman was on the call, and things just didn't add up. And so they were able to think for themselves and say, well, I think that's a male. Now that is not right. We cannot be an organization of total non-transparency. This should not have happened. This gentleman should not have gotten in at that level, not going through any of the things that I went through as a volunteer, working my way through the various hoops. It was just totally non-transparent and shouldn't have happened, but it did. And yes, I would say it had a part. There was definitely a part played in influencing how this all went forward.
Cheryl, there you go.
When this person in Arizona was admitted as an alumni member, one of the things that we've found out is that he had been a member of a fraternity in college. Now, the rules in sororities say if you become an active member in any sorority, you can't quit that sorority and join another one. So the rules keep getting bent for these males that identify as women. And that's not the way it works for women trying to get into a sorority. The rules aren't bent. our GPAs still have to be high. But in the case in Wyoming, the individual that was admitted as a member had a lower GPA than any woman that would have been allowed.
Mm.
And so the rules keep getting bent, and favoritism granted to people identifying as women, but not to the women. And again, common sense is just gone, and the rules are gone.
And then to the question, is this happening in other sororities? We're sure it is. It probably is. And this is one of those things that it's hard, I think, for women in college to speak up and say anything because nobody wants to be called a name. But a couple of responses to that thought, which is, one, know what you deserve. You deserve the sisterhood that you were promised when you signed up. It is not bigoted to think that you deserve anything less than that. And if you would like to contact IWF to tell us your story, you absolutely can. So we've kind of heard through the grapevine maybe of other things that are happening other places, but you know, and it's just hard to know exactly what the extent is. But you know, the TikTok has hashtag trans viewed 70 billion times. This is something young people identify as LGBTQ plus AI at 30+%. So this is something that's going to keep happening unless women decide that they say, I'm gonna do something about it.
Yeah, that's so important. Another question we have from Karen Greggio. This is a great question. What is the NPC, that stands for National Pan-Hellenic Conference? What has their role been in this?
So this is there is mention of this in the lawsuit, but all of the Panhellenic sororities are members of NPC. NPC doesn't itself establish membership criteria, so it can't change the membership criteria for any sorority, but they can come together to create various levels of policies, from the strongest unanimous agreements to the lowest kind of like thoughts, policies, those types of things, online statements. And so NPC does have something, I would say, that's in the middle tier of how seriously to treat it, which says that for purposes of recruitment, woman shall mean anyone who identifies as a woman, which of course is entirely circular. Okay, anyone who identifies as a what? Anyone who identifies as a woman. So okay, the definition doesn't make any sense. We know that. But the problem is that NPC does establish that member organizations shall defend their single-sex status, and that is the highest level of obligation for sororities. But either way, NPC cannot change the membership criteria for any of the organizations. So even if they have some sort of nod that they don't know what a woman is, it is then up to each individual sorority to implement what that means. And Kappa has not implemented that in their bylaws. I don't know if actually any sorority has implemented that through their bylaws.
Okay. I love this next question. This is a question I would have asked. This is from Nancy Vanderlip. What is being done to replace the Kappa Kappa Gamma leadership at headquarters?
In on this one a little bit. Our lawsuit addresses that. And in our lawsuit, we specifically asked that the leadership all be removed. And I think that's powerful, because these leaders have caused Kappa to lose, 25% of their alumni members in the last 2 years. Donations are down from alumni members. So all of their actions really are hurting the Kappa organization as an entire entity.
Anyone else? I think that like many institutions in this country, I sort of think a lot about this when it has to do with education organizations, and particularly parent organizations like the PTA, which is it's supposed to be parent teacher organization, and they don't really seem to care that much about parents, in that they're always advocating for teachers, and and I don't mean to derail this and go into this, but I think it really is important to understand that so many of our institutions have been taken over by people who have a very slanted political agenda, and getting control of that is something, and having a voice in leadership is something that I think can really solve a lot of these problems. Anybody else have to
Yes,
add to that?
I
Yes,
was
go
just going
ahead.
to add to what you said. Very important. The idea that all of a sudden we have an organization that has leadership that has not followed its own bylaws.
Right.
They must be removed. And to do that is not an easy deal. That's part of the reason for our lawsuit. We need other very qualified women, because we still believe in the qualifications for the woman. And even though what happened in Arizona with the gentleman should not have happened because the qualifications weren't there, it did. And so at this point, we really need to have new, strong leadership that understand what it is to be a woman in the United States today. We are still entitled to what we fought so hard for. In 1972, when Title IX went through, we all whooped because we didn't get to have that opportunity. I don't want to see that happen to sororities. We have fought too long and too hard to have it be a woman-only organization. People who identify as women, fine. They can go and start their own group, just like Kappa Kappa Gamma did.
And I just want to add one thing, which is I think that this lawsuit is powerful, not only because it asks for directors who no longer follow Kappa's mission to step down, but sometimes what you need is more than just new leadership. So yes, you do need better people, but I think we can look at Claudine Gay at Harvard, for example. She's gone, but all of the root causes to the problem are still there. And here, what has happened is there's been a complete ideological takeover from elitists in this country, not just from, Kappa leaders, but people who refuse to accept that women exist and that women can be defined and that women are real and women are biological. So I think that this lawsuit is one of those things that it's not enough to replace Claudine Gay. We really have to investigate what's going on here, and it's deeper and broader and therefore more powerful than simply a change of a human being.
Yeah, that's a great point. Next question is from Carol Conway. She is Gamma Beta 1975. Are fraternity council leaders being elected online in April? If so, hasn't the future of KKG leadership been determined before convention? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? It seems a little bit in the weeds, but you may have some thoughts.
I would just say this to that this is unheard of. This is never done before. So we have a new wrinkle here, the electronic election of the leaders. And I believe it's going to have to be monitored very closely. It's going to have to be watched very closely. But yes, there's an element there that is totally, completely outside of the bounds of the way it should have been followed through on. And that was a lot of these guidelines have been changed without a change in the bylaws. So consequently, we now have an awful lot of appointed people, and the election that always took place at convention is now happening online. And I believe those are all things that can be readdressed once that council has been replaced. But until then, it is a challenge. There's no question about it, to have the honesty and the integrity to do that electronic election correct.
Things that frightens me is that in this process, they have had people apply for various elected positions. And then, and Patsy, correct me if I'm wrong, a very small number of people in leadership then select the actual candidate. And they are only selecting people, if they can, they try to just select people that are woke and are pushing DEI. So it's a very dangerous, frightening situation where we really don't have any debate. There's no debate.
Well, that's critical in DEI. Anything, is that there's no debate, that there's absolute collective agreement on all issues, and that's sort of a cornerstone of DEI. I'm gonna move on, and May, these are probably very quick answers you can give. This is from Claire Wilson. She asks, when is the case going to trial? And then I have a follow-up.
We don't know. So what usually happens and what we expect to happen is that Kappa files what's called a motion to dismiss. That's what happened in the Wyoming case, which is they say, accepting all of the facts that Patsy, Margot, and Cheryl alleged are true, we still didn't violate the law because fill in the blank. And so that's basically intended to shut the courthouse doors to these women. Kappa could file that, let's just say, in the next couple months. Then Patsy and Cheryl would have, to brief that over the next couple months. And then you'd have a decision maybe in half a year at the very earliest. But then a trial, even so, let's just say they are allowed to get in the courthouse door, then you're going to trial. It's going to take eons. So I think a lot of people are, Trump is dragging his feet in his trials. Are going, no. Usually what happens is that these things do take a very, very long time. There's a lot of documents, there's a lot of questions, all of those types of things. So we don't expect a trial anytime soon, but we do expect a decision potentially within the next half a year or so, at least saying whether Patsy and Cheryl and Margot have the right to be in court. And that is a very powerful ruling. And so something that we can look forward to in the relatively near future.
So the follow-up question that I have is from Merle Hansen. She says, did the MPC file a supporting brief in the lawsuit?
So in the Wyoming case, which those women were kicked out, where they were not allowed in the courthouse doors, and that's what Independent Women's Forum, Independent Women's Law Center are appealing, saying no, they deserve to be in court. Pan-Hellenic did file on Kappa leadership's behalf, so against these women, against the Kappa women. And what NPC said is, this is how all things go. They take the truth, but then they use it to defend a lie. So the truth is that sororities and other private organizations should be allowed to pick their members. No problem with that. Of course, it's a membership only organization. If someone's, doing something crazy in the bathroom, terrorizing all the members, you have the right to kick that person out and not even accept them in the first place. But once you've decided who those members are, so here the members shall be a woman, and then someone unilaterally changes the membership criteria, that's totally different. So it is very upsetting that Pan-Hellenic decided to try and support Kappa leadership rather than the woman. And of course, the argument that they have is totally unobjectionable. It's just totally inapplicable here.
Okay. Ladies, you'll have something to say about these next couple questions. This is from Kathy Martin. When can local alum chapters do to support this lawsuit and get a change in national KKG leadership? I would like to connect something to that question. I hope, Kathy Martin, I hope you don't mind, but how this has got to be expensive. This has got to take contributions. How are you guys sort of going forward with this? How are you funding this lawsuit? I think that would be kind of helpful information for people to know that are watching, because many people probably want to help.
I can speak to that. So yes, when this all happened, then we realized, wow, we need to get some things put in place so people can help us, because it is expensive. And when you're funding something yourself, your passion for the cause is there, that never departs, but the pocketbook gets squeezed. And so we had, my daughter and I, Margot, who's on this call, had put together a 501c3 that we are working on with education of women And it all fit kind of perfectly because we took a look at how the bylaws were set up in our own 501c3, and we had the opportunity to make that the hub for receiving. So we can receive tax deductible funds through this 501c3. And we also felt like, wow, going forward, we need to get the message out. This is a wonderful avenue, and thank you so much for it. Yes, anybody that would like to help us, if they'll just contact us through IWN, that would be great. Through any one of us individually, that would be great. We'll be happy to give you the information where to help with the contributions, because truly the leadership has to be changed. The leadership that is currently in place is so one-tracked. They are tracked with the idea of doing the DEI thing across the board, no matter what. And that will destroy the Kappa Kappa Gamma that we all know and love.
Well, I'd just like to add, it's the educational and women's rights issue of our time. I mean, this boils down to human dignity for women, and it's being taken and robbed from us. And so this isn't about policy or legislation. This is truly a civil rights issue for us as women, and to come forward and advocate for women to have rights and to maintain those rights. We're not doing anything wrong. We are simply standing firm on the rights that we have and to continue to advocate for those civil rights for women in the future.
I believe we still have a Give, Send, Go site where people can also donate, and it is Kappa Go or Go Kappa, and that's probably also on the IWN site. So people could easily donate there, and they can be anonymous if they'd like. And I found that very handy to do just a monthly donation, even if it's small. So we welcome all donations to help us, and we will. I know IWN has been a fabulous supporter, and we really appreciate everybody that has given donations.
Well, I think it's also important for those who can't give donations to write a letter to Kappa Kappa Gamma leadership. Tell them of your displeasure. Talk to them about how this puts young women at risk, and that this goes contrary to their own bylaws. There's a variety of ways that you can help, and maybe when we post this, we can add that into the post so people can support your efforts that way. Um, this is our last question from Susan Davis. She says, are biological females identifying as men and joining fraternities? Or is it just biological males identify as women joining women's organizations? I just want to say one thing in follow up to this question is that it's funny because we don't see this in sports a lot. We don't see a lot of biological women looking to run or compete against biological males. So it's very rarely in reverse. Have you heard of cases of the reverse happening where women are joining fraternities?
I can speak to that, and I have not heard of one single instance of it. It's not to say that it's not out there somewhere, but I think women have long looked at the fraternity role and said, no, thank you, that's for men. And I don't see it happening. I really don't see it happening where a biological female suddenly wants to identify as a man to get into a fraternity. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, so in theory, a lot of the frats say that they would accept a female.
I bet they would.
Like it. But there's a safety issue involved here, right? And a rights issue. So if somebody who is smaller, more vulnerable, a female, decides that that person wants to go into the lion's den or whatever, there is some element of choice there that's not going to threaten the males who are living in that environment. There is an entirely different aspect to a male who goes into a female environment. And I think that is what makes it extra important that a democratic process of changing the bylaws be used, because it may be the case that sororities do decide that they would like to take men of certain stripe. But in order to do that, they would like to add other things to the bylaws, that you have to have locks on the bathroom doors, that maybe that the individual has done, something to make the women feel more comfortable. I think that there is just a different environment in a sorority than there is in a fraternity, even if you have an equal number of willing participants. And I think that difference makes the bylaw amendment process that much more important.
Thank you, May. I wanted just to give Patsy, Margot, Cheryl, if you have any other last thoughts. We're wrapping up here. This is a great place to wrap up. You guys have provided us so much great information, you as well, May. But I wanted to give Patsy, Margot, and Cheryl a moment for last thoughts if you're interested in offering any before we sign off.
Well, my last thought is the same thought I've had since the very beginning, and that is women deserve to have their own space. And certainly when I got acquainted with the young ladies in Wyoming, I was reinforced once again to know how much they enjoy the private women-only spaces and how much they valued their sisterhood, which did not include males. So I would say, please become very aware of everything that you can read about this. And everything, the way it's been done to this point, has been so non-transparent that digging out this information is a challenge. But I would challenge everyone to do that and make up your decision based on how would you like to have your own private space invaded entirely by someone of the opposite sex. It's not healthy, it's not safe, it's just not what Kappa Kappa Gamma ever was. So that would be my parting thought.
I'd like to add to that too, just to say that, co-ed organizations have their place and they're wonderful. I trained in track and field and trained side by side, and the training was co-ed, but it has to be co-ed. So if you lead women into an organization saying it's women only and single sex, it's very clear what your organization is. And so form your own organization if you would like to have a co-ed organization, no problem. Men and women can commingle and have their organization together, no issue with that. But don't try to deceive women who are already members into a co-ed organization when they didn't sign up for that.
My parting thought is pretty much what Patsy and Margot have both said, is that women deserve to have safe spaces. And that really is a priority for me at the Kappa House in Laramie and for all the Kappa houses that have always been single sex. There are many women that join Kappa that have been impacted by sexual assaults. They want to go to a single sex home on campus where they feel safe. And I think we need to continue that for our women, because there's so few places these days that really are a home on a campus where you can feel safe.
Cheryl, that is such a good point. I feel like more and more now dorms are co-ed, and it is harder to find those women-only spaces. So I just want to echo that. I think that is one of the reasons it's so important for women to have these sororities. May, any final thoughts?
No, these women are super brave, and they are the reason that the Kappa undergrads have been able to come out and assert their own rights. It's because of these alumni who have supported them. So for people who are on this call, you might not be in a sorority, you might not be faced with a male, you might not be Riley Gaines swimming against a male, but you have a role, and you have a very important role, which is that you have to let the younger generation know that what they're feeling is valid, and that a single sex space is an okay thing to request. And so I think that's what everyone on this call can do, is to be that voice of reason for the next generation.
Patsy, Margot, Cheryl, and May, thank you so much. I have just some parting comments here. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today. If you aren't already a member of IWN, I encourage you to join today. IWN engages around multiple policy issues that enhance people's freedoms, opportunities, and well-being. Plus, members gain access to our regular programming like this and other informative resources. Visit iwnetwork.com to learn more. Thanks again for joining us. And thank you, ladies.